just make a little note. What is a rational number? Well, the standard definition says rational number is any number that ends or repeats as a decimal. Okay, so that's what a rational number is. All right, so your easy ones, 2, 4, your whole numbers, your negative numbers, all your integers, that's included. What is also included is any fraction that would end or repeat. So like if I had 2/5, that is a fraction that would end, okay, as a decimal, that's 0.4. All right, 1/3 is another one because that is 0.333 again. So if it looks like this, yeah, that's a rational number. The problem is when you get into square roots, like if you take the square root of 2, it is some big, long decimal that doesn't end and doesn't repeat. All right, it doesn't what we call terminate, and it doesn't repeat. So we cannot have that in a denominator because that implies we are dividing by an irrational number, and we can't do that in math. So what is a simplified form of radical expression? Basically, that says no perfect squares under the radical. So if I break it apart like we've been doing, there's none of that underneath this radical. There's no fractions under the radical and no radicals in the denominator. So if you have a fraction in underneath the square root, here's what's kind of nice. That's the same thing as saying square root the top, square root the bottom. Then I can just deal with the bottom. And I'll show you what I mean here in a second. So if I've got square root of 15 over square root of 12. So here's what I'm going to do. First rule says I can break that up into the square root of 15 on top, square root of 12 on the bottom. So now I've got a square root in the bottom, and I cannot have that. So here's what I like to do. First thing I like to do is simplify this. I got square root of 3, right? So that's going to be 2 over 3. So instead of square root of 15 over square root of 12, I want to write square root of 15 over 2 square root of 3. Now I'm not done. I've got a square root in the denominator. That is not simplified. All right, this is not simplified simply because this square root of 3 is here. So, Mr. Heeren, how do you get rid of it? Well, I'm glad you asked, because here's all I'm going to do. All right, I'm going to multiply what I call 1. And here's where I put that in quotation marks. I'm going to multiply by whatever the square root is I have down there. And I call this 1 because I've got the same thing on top that I do on the bottom. Technically, that's 1. So on the bottom, well, let's back up. So I'll multiply this by whatever is underneath the square root here. That is what goes here, same on top and bottom. Because watch what's going to happen. On the top, I'm going to multiply 15 times square root of 3, square root of 15 times square root of 3. That'll give me the square root of 45. All right. Then on the bottom, I'm going to have 2 times square root of 3 times square root of 3. 2 times square root of 3 times square root of 3. Well, these two together are the square root of 9, which is just 3. So this becomes 2 times 3, which is 6. So I've got the square root of 45 over 6. Now, not done. Because the square root of 45 can be split apart into square root of 9, square root of 5. So what I get is 3 square root of 5 over 6. Now, can I simplify it even more? Yes, I can, because 3 over 6 is the same thing as 1/2. So my final simplified answer will be square root of 5 over 2. Now, I did a lot more than I needed to, but I wanted to show you everything that you might have to do, okay? So yeah, another way to do it, I could have simplified 15 over 12. I could have divided both the top and bottom by 3. Then I would have gotten 5 over 4. That's fine. I can do that. And I could have worked with that too. But I still wanted to show you everything that you could or should not do with this. All right, so let's take a look at number 2. 21 over 27. In fact, we'll do that now. I can simplify 21 over 27. All right, I can divide both the top and bottom by 3. So that will give me 7 over 9. So now this one, square root of 7 over square root of 9. That's going to be square root of 7 over 3. My answer. And in fact, if I go back here and look at number 1, that's square root of 5 over 4. Square root of 4 is 2. That's square root of 5 over 2. Exactly what I had down here. So rational number written as P over Q as no non-repeating, non-terminating decimals. So when you have a radical left in the denominator, you must rationalize the denominator. So basically, here's the rule. No denominators, no square roots in the denominator. That's the rule. No square roots in the denominator. So if I look at number 3, I get square root of 1 over square root of 3. Square root of 1 is easy. That's just 1. Got a square root in the denominator. Here's all I do. I'm going back to saying when I multiplied by 1, excuse me, square root of 3 over square root of 3. Here's what that does. 1 times square root of 3 is square root of 3 on top. Square root of 3 times square root of 3 on the bottom is square root of 9. So that's square root of 3 over 3. There's my answer. Notice, no radical in the denominator. That's what I want. That's what that's got to look like. Number 4. Hey, look, I can simplify that. I can divide both the top and bottom by 2. So I get square root of 6 over 5, which breaks up to square root of 6 over square root of 5. Square root of 6 I can't do a whole lot with, but square root of 5 I got to handle. So I multiply both the top and bottom by that. So square root of 5 times square root of 5. That's going to be the square root of 25, which is just going to be square root of 30 over 5. My rationalized answer. So square root of 10 over 3. That's going to be square root of 10 over square root of 3. So multiply, no, don't equals. Multiply top and bottom by square root of 3 over square root of 3. So on top, I can multiply that all together underneath the square root. On the bottom, square root of 3 times square root of 3 is just going to be 3. So I get square root of 30 over 3. Now, one little note about this one. I will see a lot of kids that this would be their answer, but then they would go one step further and they would try telling me that this is just going to be the square root of 10. Because all they do is they take 30 divided by 3, but they leave it underneath the square root. You cannot do that because which part is underneath the square root? Well, just the 30. The 3 is not underneath the square root. We just work to get 3 from out from underneath the square root. Only the 30 is underneath the square root. And since it's underneath the square root, and this is not, you cannot divide it. So don't divide 30 divided by 3 when this is underneath the square root and this one is not. You can't do that. You cannot do that. So don't do that. Number 6, that's going to be square root of 6 over square root of 9. Start recognizing the square root of 9 is going to be 3. Square root of 6 over square root of 3. There's your winner. All right. Pause the video. See if you can do 7 and 8. Take a few minutes, work them through, and then hit pause, and then hit replay again, and we'll see how you do. Okay, ready, here we go. So this one should be 27 over 15. Well, if I divide both the top and bottom by 3, I get square root of 9 on the top, square root of 5 on the bottom. Square root of 9 is going to be 3. Square root of 5 is still square root of 5, so I multiply top and bottom by square root of 5, because that's my 1. So I get 3 square root of 5 over 5. There's my answer. So if you got that, good job. If you didn't, go back and look and see what you might have made a mistake on. 5 over 12 can't be simplified, so I got to go to 5 over square root of 12. Square root of 12, however, can be simplified. Square root of 4 times square root of 3, so that's 2 square root of 3. You guys might have remembered that from one of the first problems we did. So do I really need to multiply by square root of 12? No, I multiply it by square root of 3, which is what I want to do. Top is going to be square root of 15. Bottom is going to be 2 times 3, which is going to be 6. So my simplified answer will be square root of 15 over 6. So check and see if you got both those right. If you did not, then fix one here. Number 9, simplify. I can divide both top and bottom by 3. 1 over 7 is a lot easier to handle than 3 over 21. So I'll break that up into square root of 1 over square root of 7. Square root of 1 is a fancy way of saying 1. So I'm going to multiply both top and bottom by square root of 7 that I'm multiplying by. So I get square root of 7 over, when I multiply this together, is square root of 49, which is just going to be 7. All right, I'm really hope you guys are kind of getting the hang of this. Notice each time I'm leaving a number, not a square root in the denominator, and the top, I try and simplify it as best I can, but there's like no simpler way to write square root of 7. That's just square root of 7. Number 10 breaks up, divide both top and bottom by 2. That's 2/5. So square root of 2, square root of 5. Not a lot that can be done, so I'm just going to go square root of 5 on top. That's my 1 that I multiply by. So I'm going to multiply square root of 10. Square root of 5 times square root of 5 is just going to be 5. Once again, don't start dividing. That is my simplified answer. It would shock you guys how many people are going to magically put square root of 2 here.